And I call Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The issue of diversion of trade is becoming an increasing problem of manifold proportions for Northern Ireland. Before the protocol, Madam Deputy Speaker, you could move goods from Birmingham to Belfast as easily as you could move them from Gloucester to Glasgow, but no more. And the resulting Irish Sea border and all that comes with it has caused a huge and increasing diversion of trade. We can have an insight into how things naturally should be and how business wishes them to be by looking at the NISRA, the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency figures of recent years. And if we look at the pre-protocol days, we will see that in 2018, for example, the amount of goods, the volume of goods purchased from the Irish Republic was 2.8 billion. The amount published from GB was 5 times that, 13.4 billion. So there you have a snapshot of what is the natural inclination of trade in Northern Ireland, particularly in respect of our raw materials. And before Brexit, it was a similar situation. And indeed, you could say, some might say, that's a better reflection of whether or not there's been trade diversion. Because before Brexit, you could as readily buy your goods from the Republic as you could from GB, because we were all in the EU single market. And even then, the predominant trading of choice was from GB. No surprise, because for decades, Northern Ireland has been a particularly integrated part of the UK economy. But along comes the protocol, and it requires Northern Ireland to be subject to the foreign customs code, that of the EU. And that customs code, of course, treats GB as a third or foreign country. And therefore its goods coming from outside the EU into the EU, which we in Northern Ireland are regarded as being within the EU for those purposes, those goods have to be checked. You have customs declarations, you have documentary checks, you have physical checks on all our raw materials provided for. So no surprise then that that is bound to inevitably cause diversion of trade. Now, we were told, as part of the spin of selling the protocol, oh, there were protections against diversion of trade. It wouldn't be allowed to happen. Article 16 of the protocol, we were told, was our safety net. And it says, if the application of this protocol leads to diversion of trade, the United Kingdom may unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures. It has led to diversion of trade, but the United Kingdom government has not taken unilateral action in that regard. And so the fact of diversion of trade is a challenge to the protocol proponents. It is a challenge to those that put this upon us. And it is a challenge that they have to meet, but which I fear they won't. Where is the proof, some might say, of diversion of trade? Well, again, it's in the NISRA statistics. Dr. Esmond Birney, renowned economist in Northern Ireland, has done a succession of studies of the NISRA statistics. And he wrote just back on the 11th of December that the data provided is further evidence that the Northern Ireland economy is becoming more trade integrated with the Republic, that north-south trade is growing at a very rapid rate at the expense of what previously was an inflow of goods from Great Britain.
Further down.
And perhaps a moment. So you also find that in the purchase of goods that NISRA reports. They've given us figures from 2020, contrasting them in the table with 2023. Now 2023 is only the beginning of things getting difficult, because the Irish Sea border didn't effectively come into place until October 23 because of the grace periods. But those figures from NISRA show that Northern Ireland's purchases of goods from 20 to 23 increased, and of course, period of inflation, by 24% from GB, but by 50% from the Republic of Ireland. So twice the growth rate of the buying of goods into Northern Ireland, which previously would have come from our integrated United Kingdom economy. And then we see the Office of National Statistics Business Insights and Condition Survey. It says that 13.1% of currently trading manufacturers based in GB said they sent goods to Northern Ireland in the last 12 months. That was at the end of 2024. But in January 21, 20% of manufacturers in GB were sending goods to Northern Ireland. So in just those 4 years, a dramatic fall in the number of companies, manufacturers, supplying goods to Northern Ireland. It is nearly halved in 4 years. And the OSN data for 2024 tells us more. It tells us that 11.7% of companies tell us they have stopped trading with Northern Ireland. Why? Because of the bureaucracy, because you have to make statutory customs declarations, because you have to have them checked, because you have to employ extra staff to do all of that. And many, particularly of the smaller sectors, companies have simply said, not going to do it.
Member give way.
In a moment, perhaps. I do need to make sure I get through what I need to say. So, it is beyond doubt, I would respectfully say, that there has been trade diversion. Back in September, the Road Haulage Association gave evidence to a parliamentary committee of this House. And they told that committee that 30% of haulage rates that take goods to GB are returning empty. Why? Because GB companies have stopped supplying. Now that is an incredible thing to contemplate. That trade which works on the basis that you take goods out and you fill your area and bring goods back, and that's how you make it viable, and that's how the economy works, that 30% of lorries now returning to Northern Ireland are returning empty. That is an incredible indictment of the operation of the protocol. And things are getting worse because we now have the EU regulation on general product safety, which puts more burdens on companies selling into Northern Ireland because if they have to meet enhanced EU safety product regulations. I know of the craft sector, I've mentioned in this House before. Recently, 11 suppliers in that niche market stopped supplying Northern Ireland. And it'll get worse because the partial border is coming when you're going to have to make more paperwork, more declarations about sending simple parcels from GB to Northern Ireland. And some of the big suppliers like Tesco's, they have now told, and it's available in one of their slides that they showed to their own suppliers, that they should now buy from the Republic because it was easier to supply than from GB. It's the same happening in veterinary medicines. It's happening in every sector. Why does it matter? Well, it matters for a very pertinent political reason. Because the whole idea of trade diversion and the whole purpose of the protocol was and is to build an all-Ireland economy, to dismantle the economic links from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, to enhance the links with the Irish Republic, and thereby to create stepping stones out of the United Kingdom into an all-Ireland for Northern Ireland. That was the determination that lay behind this protocol. Because we don't need a protocol to govern trade. It's been demonstrably shown that if you can organise trade through Northern Ireland to GB without an Irish sea border checks, if you can do it, as the government now tells you can do it, with checks away from the border, then equally you could do it in the other direction through mutual enforcement. That we both recognise that if we're going to export from one territory to another, our manufacturers must produce the goods to the standards of the other, and you enforce that by making it a criminal offence to do otherwise. That's the essence of mutual enforcement. That would work, but it's not allowed to work because the political agenda of the protocol is to ensure that there is this reorientation, this realignment. And then we're told, oh, you have got now Intertrade UK. Intertrade UK with no staff, Intertrade UK with no budget, in comparison with Intertrade Ireland, which has over 50 staff, a budget of £6.5 million a year. It's active in the whole area, and yet UK Trade set up as a shadow to really not be able to compete in any sense. So I do say to this government, you have allowed the economy of Northern Ireland to drift out of the United Kingdom. I believe those who are protocol enthusiasts want that to happen. And now it is happening. The onus is back on you to do something about it. Yes, I'll give it up.
Before the member takes that intervention, I know that the member contributing was anxious about getting through his speech, but because adjournment started early, he does have until 7:30. I believe he's about to take an intervention. Do you want to continue with the intervention?
I'll give way to the honourable member.
14 times.
Madam Deputy Speaker, you shouldn't encourage him. He will take the 7:30 and beyond because this is such an important subject. And would you agree with me that not only are there the political implications of this trade diversion, but its economic implications for Northern Ireland economy as well? The increased transport costs because lorries don't come both ways with goods in them. The fact that many suppliers, and people chose suppliers in England because they were cheaper, better quality, etc. And now manufacturers in Northern Ireland are having to go to the second best suppliers, and the additional paperwork which is involved all adds to costs, make the economy less competitive, and therefore makes it more difficult for the Northern Ireland economy to be viable.
The right honourable member is absolutely right. Business is like water. It follows the easiest course. So when we were an integrated part of the UK economy, the easiest and cheapest course was to do the greater bulk of our trade with GB. That historically has been our basic supply market, to our raw materials and everything else. Then, when you impose a fettering of trade, naturally, business will go to the easiest route. And the easiest route now, sadly, is to cease trading from GB and to accentuate trading with the EU, most particularly the Republic of Ireland. And that in respect of a United Kingdom which was built on two pillars according to the Acts of Union. One, a political union, Article 3 establishing this House as one sovereign parliament for the whole United Kingdom, and an economic union through Article 6 establishing the economic union of unfettered trade between and within all parts of the United Kingdom. That was what Article 6 said, that there should be unfettered trade. Along comes the protocol, fettering trade, so our Supreme Court, of course, has no choice but to accept that the protocol has therefore subjugated Article 6, the very foundation of our economic union, has caused Article 6 to be in suspension. Now, if Article 6, that which says there shall be unfettered trade, is in suspension, then it's no wonder that the consequence of that fettering of trade is diversion of trade. I'll give way to
I'll thank my learned friend for giving way, and it's about that divergence of trade. The member will know, and most Northern Ireland MPs will know, of Coleman's Garden Centre in my constituency in South Antrim. Madam Deputy Speaker, a fantastic garden centre that supplies quite a number of people from across Northern Ireland who have had a difficulty in getting plants and fruit actually brought across from their main supplier, which is McIntyre Fruit in Scotland, in regards to that. And talking to the manager of Coleman's Garden Centre, actually just before this debate, he was saying he'd been in contact with Stuart McIntyre from McIntyre Fruit in Scotland. They've just picked up a contract to supply a supplier in Japan with the same product. And what they are actually now saying, bureaucracy-wise, administration-wise, it's actually easier for a supplier in Scotland to supply into Japan than it is across the 14-mile stretch of water into Northern Ireland.
Well, I think that illustrates, Madam Deputy Speaker, the absurdity of where we've got to. And, you know, it has been accentuated by our subjection to the EU product safety regulations, because those regulations provide that if you're supplying into Northern Ireland from outside the EU, in other words, from GB, you must have resident within the EU, an agent. You must complete the paperwork on the origin of your goods, on your customs declarations, and you can't do that without employing an agent within the EU. Anyone who knows anything about business will know that that is added cost, and will know that that will cause many businesses to say, well, Northern Ireland's not a huge market to start with, I'll just not bother with it. And that's what we are all suffering from, our businesses in Northern Ireland. Yes, I could.
Can I first of all thank and congratulate the Honourable Member for North Antrim for bringing this forward. Small businesses in my constituency, Madam Chair, have told me just this week that they're now having to pay HMRC a duty for buying goods from English suppliers. So it's not just the issue of it's the issue of cost now as well, and then selling the same goods in Northern Ireland to the Northern Ireland consumer, remaining within the internal market. And yet one trader just this last week, last Friday, he told me, he says he's now having to pay more in duties to HMRC than an invoice was for the goods, because the onus is not to trust the retailer that the goods will remain, but assume that they will be sold into the EU. And further, does the Honourable Member not agree that the same HMRC operates greater trust in the acceptance of VAT declarations on the premise that they will be checked at random than it does for internal trade within the United Kingdom? What a backward step.
Yes, I agree. And you know, when we think about the Irish Sea border, it is incredible that given the infinitesimal amount of trade that in regard to the proportion of EU's trade, the infinitesimal amount of goods and trade that crosses that border, it is incredible that figures showed that it has got 20% of the entire checks across the whole EU. We're bringing goods from GB to Northern Ireland. That infinitesimal, in terms of the totality of EU trade, that infinitesimal amount warrants 20% of all the checks in the EU. It'd be easier to bring goods from Belarus into the EU than it is to bring them from GB into Northern Ireland. Yes?
I would accept that when he talked about infinitesimal, about 0.4% of EU trade actually crosses that border, and yet it accounts for 20% of checks. And that's not going to be the story for the future. Because in my constituency, we're already building a £140 million EU control post on a 10-acre site. Once that's open, then there's much more scope to check goods in an even greater degree. And indeed, if that is not the point, what's the point in having such a large EU border post in the middle of the United Kingdom?
And of course that is the point, because this is an EU border. It's subject to EU trade laws. It's EU laws that govern the Irish Sea border. And it is EU officials who, within the protocol, have got the right to supervise checking. And when the full panoply of facilities are provided that are being built at Larne and at other ports, then I fear we will indeed see the muscle of EU inspections, because the protocol gives them the upper hand in that regard, and gives an EU who boasted that the price of Brexit would be Northern Ireland, gives them that upper hand. But I do want to return to the point that this is imbued by a political motivation, and the political motivation is not to get Northern Ireland the best of both worlds. My goodness, what a con that is. Because we now know that in terms of foreign direct investment, which was supposed, the protocol was supposed to make Northern Ireland a Mecca, a Singapore of the West, there has been no uplift whatsoever. Why? Because if you're a manufacturer coming to establish in Northern Ireland, you're not just interested in the fact that you can sell your goods out of Northern Ireland. You're interested in where you're getting your raw materials from. And when you're told that your basic supply line has to pass through an international customs border controlled by the EU, then the shine soon goes off the prospect of investing in Northern Ireland. So we are in a situation, a pretty dire situation, which is getting worse. One which has massive constitutional implications, massive economic implications, and yet a government, I fear, deaf and blind to the issues, because the government does not want to face the consequences, that they are hand in glove with the EU, dismantling Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and setting us on a course whereby the economics marries with the politics and Northern Ireland ceases to be.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Yes?
I'm most grateful to you for giving way. But we were told by the previous administration that with the new Green Lane, with the Windsor framework, all would be glorious. It could be the best of both worlds. Did the previous administration mislead the House?
I think not just the previous administration. I think there has been gross, calculated and deliberate misleading about the protocol from day one. And I think, we're told, oh, Green Lane is gone. It's not. You still have to do customs declarations. You still have documentary checks. But all our raw materials must, by dint of what the protocol says, come through the red lane. So they must be subject to all the rigour of the EU's international border. And that is what is going to cripple our economy. We've seen it in small sectors, craft sector, for example. Niche sector depends on small suppliers giving up. But when it bites, as it will bite, we're going to see it right across our economy. And therefore I do say to the government, you need to find some dignity in terms of standing up for this United Kingdom. And this United Kingdom is not just Great Britain. This United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland. And it's time to put some mettle into defending that position and rowing back from the disastrous, destructive elements that this protocol has brought to us. Thank you very much.